Finding the love of your life, running away together, and getting married is something some teenage girls fantasize about. Caroline Crouch was no exception. A young high school student, just 15 years old, was charmed by a wealthy 27-year-old pilot who flew his helicopter above her school. After winning her affection, the two ran away and got married. But what appeared to be the ideal storybook romance would eventually become a murder that deceived everyone. On Tuesday, May 11, 2021, at 4:30 in the morning, a man named Charalambos Anagnostopoulos, also called Babis, was violently jolted awake from sleep. At that moment, he had been renting a two-story house in the suburbs of Glyka Nera, an area on the edge of Athens, Greece. Babis had no opportunity to fight back as three men hiding their faces with hoods wrestled and dominated him. They carried handguns and quickly tied up Babis, then covered his eyes with duct tape. He was helpless as the attackers then targeted his wife, a 19-year-old woman named Caroline Crouch. This whole incident woke their 11-month-old baby who was sleeping close by. The attackers, speaking with Greek and Albanian accents, kept demanding to know where the money was kept. Caroline had no idea that what looked like a burglary would become her own death. Caroline Crouch was born to retired engineer David Crouch and Susan Della Cuesta on July 12, 2001 in Athens. When she was only 8 years old, the family moved to the island of Anagnostopoulos, the location where she spent her childhood. They relocated because both David and Susan had grown to adore the seaside environment. From an early age, Caroline loved her life by the beach. She had a strong interest in both scuba diving and swimming. She met her future spouse, Babis, during a Good Friday procession in 2017. At that time, Babis worked as a commercial helicopter pilot, and Caroline was only 15 years of age. 3 years later, they married in Portugal on July 15, 2019. Several days before her death, Babis and Caroline had bought a piece of property. Both had intentions to construct their ideal home on this land for themselves and their baby daughter. To help pay for the land, Caroline received €50,000 as a present from her parents. For the building expenses, the couple had approximately €10,000 concealed in their residence. The Greek public at that time had little trust in banks as they continuously faced the threat of financial collapse. Given these conditions, it was typical for ordinary people to keep cash hidden in their homes as it was considered a more secure choice. Caroline likely shared this viewpoint for keeping cash and could never have predicted what would occur on May 11. Both Babis and Caroline, along with their baby, were filled with terror as the attackers demanded the money. Trying to end the horror that had come upon them, Babis revealed exactly where the money was concealed, a spot that's considered quite unusual. The attackers opened the Monopoly board game box and removed all the money Babis and Caroline had saved for their dream home. But they didn't leave yet. Each attacker continued wandering from room to room as they grabbed jewelry and other valuables. The thieves wanted more, but Babis and Caroline had surrendered everything they possessed and in desperation and terror pleaded for their survival and that of their child. Babis could hear his wife's screams as the attackers held a gun against the 11-month-old baby. Though his eyes were covered, he struggled constantly against the bindings. However, the cord around his throat was pulled so tight that he kept losing and regaining awareness. He ultimately lost consciousness and then came to after some time. Upon awakening, he realized that the men had departed from the residence. At that instant, the only sound he could detect was the agonizing cries of his baby daughter. After roughly 30 minutes, Babis managed to reach his mobile device and contact emergency services using his nose. As soon as the connection was established, Babis shouted for assistance, requesting emergency services to dispatch an ambulance and providing his address. Because he had tape covering his mouth, the entire conversation was filled with unclear words. The dispatcher on the line asked Babis to describe what occurred, but "robbers entered" was all he could articulate. An hour and a half had elapsed since the attackers had invaded Babis and Caroline's home. Emergency responders reached the location around 6 o'clock in the morning as they rushed up the front stairs to access the house. What they witnessed can only be characterized as horrifying. Inside, the living area and kitchen had been utterly ransacked. The storage compartments were open and empty with clothes and other possessions scattered across the entire area. Among these items was an open Monopoly box, the identical box in which Babis and Caroline had concealed the money. Emergency responders also discovered a security camera on the living room furniture. It looked as if it had been torn from the walls. While the camera was resting on the furniture, its storage card was absent. From the stairway hung the body of a white and brown husky puppy who had been choked with her own leash. Babis was discovered on the floor of the main bedroom. His eyes and mouth were covered in tape that extended to his throat, and bindings kept his limbs behind his back. On the bed, positioned face down, was Caroline Crouch. Their baby was next to her, weeping and clapping as she nudged her mother, attempting to wake her. Caroline is pronounced dead. Their child, while clearly upset, seemed to be unhurt. Emergency responders, however, were swift to notice Caroline's colorless skin and concluded that she was killed. Babis displayed visible distress when he was released from his bindings and saw his wife's body, the woman he'd been devoted to for the previous 5 years. The authorities were quick to guarantee the child's safety and started to question Babis. Based on his account and the condition of the crime location, the involvement of 4 men was established. Police authorities determined that 3 men had accessed the house while the 4th stood guard. They interpreted the entire sequence of incidents up to the killing and departure as follows. 1. Attackers approached the residence through a dirt pathway that led to its back entrance. 2. They were unable to break in through the back door and then removed security pins from a basement window to access the house. 3. After entering the home, they killed Roxy, the family's 7-month-old husky. The murder weapon was her own leash. 4. The 3 men then accessed the main sleeping room where Babis and Caroline were resting. 5. Then they vandalized the house and removed the money from the Monopoly box. 6. Before leaving, they killed Caroline by suffocating her with a pillow. 7. Since Babis was drifting in and out of awareness, the attackers may have believed he died and left, thinking they had left no survivors behind. Regarding Caroline's death, it was disclosed that it was not an immediate experience. The 20-year-old woman endured an attack that continued for approximately 6 minutes. Marks across her body indicated signs of resistance, and those on her mouth and tongue suggested the possibility of pointed objects being utilized. No indications of sexual violation were discovered.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Although the destruction done to the couple's residence was extensive, no solid proof was left behind by the attackers. The only item that emergency first responders located in the house was the hood of one of the attackers. Based on how Babis had portrayed the incident, it was determined that the hood must have dropped while Babis was resisting. This may have been a minor piece of proof for a case of such size, but the hood dropping was sufficient for Babis to catch a quick view of the perpetrator. A drawing depicting a heavy, dark-complexioned, tall person was produced based on the information Babis provided. Despite being confused, Babis was able to recognize 2 guns that were utilized as well. According to him, the attackers had a black handgun and a silver revolver. Information from the investigation disclosed that attackers were able to flee with €10,000 in cash and jewelry valued at €20,000. Additionally, police determined that this was an action of professional criminals who had watched the family and waited for the appropriate moment to attack. Furthermore, a police representative had declared it was savage and violent and went on to categorize it as an action of someone with an absence of feelings and a strong antisocial character. Many theories soon emerged as information from the investigation provided increasing understanding into the murder. A central line of thinking in everyone's consciousness was that if money was the reason, why was killing required? Some other theories proposed claims such as the attackers were intoxicated on substances and could not manage their behavior, or maybe Caroline recognized or was familiar with them. Caroline opposed and fought back, given that she was a black belt martial artist and attackers had to silence her to maintain her under submission. Concerns being raised as Caroline may have begun to yell when her 11-month-old child had a weapon against her head. While all of this was pure theory, the investigators were definite about one aspect. The attack was planned in advance. The justification for such a belief was that the attackers knew the couple had money concealed in the residence. Based on this belief, the police questioned Babis and Caroline's close associates. They suspected that the gang had been provided a tip. Alongside these questions, security cam footage from residences and establishments in close vicinity was also reviewed. In the footage, the police recognized a dark-shaded vehicle, followed by a motorcycle that was moving around the couple's residence on the morning of the killing. Caroline Crouch was buried 3 days after the killing. Her burial location was the Greek island of Anagnostopoulos, the same place her parents had fallen in love and the same place where she spent her childhood. Babis honored his wife and said he was fortunate that he had encountered Caroline, very fortunate that she adored him and even more fortunate that she was the mother of his child. He went on to say that their child would grow with no memory of her mother. Babis added that Caroline was the happiness of existence and will always be close to him through their child. While Caroline was being buried, a vehicle was stopped in northeast Greece as a standard check. Inside was a 36-year-old Georgian national man, traveling toward the Bulgarian border. He had handed over his passport, but it was soon recognized as a fake. Who was this person, and how is this connected to Caroline's killing? This person was soon recognized as a violent offender who had multiple previous convictions. He was wanted for 12 break-ins that were executed all over Athens over the previous 6 months. What portrayed him as the probable perpetrator was the reality that 3 of these offenses were executed around Babis and Caroline's area. One of the 3 was in December when this criminal and 3 others invaded a residence through a back window, similar to what occurred with Babis and Caroline. They then proceeded to pull the woman occupant by the hair and threatened to cut her throat. During that burglary, the group had taken 10,000 cash and jewelry. Their subsequent target was on March 7, just 2 months before Babis and Caroline appeared on their target list. During this burglary, they restrained 4 individuals and an elderly couple along with their cleaning woman. The stolen items included cash and other valuable possessions. If patterns aren't sufficient to portray him as the perpetrator for the killing, then consider this: he had notable similarities with the drawing that was created using Babis' portrayal of the attacker. The proof accumulated against this criminal included a record of violent break-ins, an effort to escape the nation, and similarity to the drawing. Given all of this, the police were assured that they had located their suspect. He was detained and questioned for 4 days, during which physical techniques of obtaining answers were also used. He was continuously questioned about getting the address, accessing the house, and killing Caroline. The physical techniques used to obtain answers left him injured. However, he maintained his position and declared that he'd never known of Caroline Crouch. The proof police had against him had proven insufficient. He wasn't their suspect after all and was absolved of any participation in the killing. As a result, 3 police authorities were demoted from the Athens homicide unit. Continuing the investigation, the police directed their attention to a local Albanian organized crime organization. Initially, they had a roster of 100 individuals that was later reduced to 10. These 10 were persons who were on a roster of offenders known as the priority list. Photographs of each one were displayed to Babis, but the police didn't disclose any other information. The case was requiring longer than typical to resolve, and the public was starting to lose tolerance given that crimes based on ethnicity had risen. The details on Caroline's case were so limited that even a substantial monetary compensation went unclaimed. Residents of Athens by now were existing in terror, not knowing who would be the subsequent victim. Media accounts from the time referenced specialists saying that this was not a typical case, and if it was, it would have been resolved. Some investigation information that were disclosed stated that there was no genetic material or identification marks. Caroline's family were clearly appreciative for the continued pursuit of fairness. Babis informed journalists that he wishes that what was occurring to him would never occur to anyone else. He supported police attempts and continued to face the media, all to maintain Caroline's case prominent. Babis was even engaged on social platforms, responding to inquiries and conveying appreciation for continued backing. A development came on June 17, 37 days after Caroline was savagely killed. A small remembrance service was being conducted for her on Anagnostopoulos. Those who had come to grieve noticed the investigator at the ceremony. The investigators waited until the gathering had finished and then started to approach Babis quietly, requesting to be accompanied to Athens. The investigators at the time had fresh details about the case and pressed Babis to come and recognize the person. Babis, not knowing what awaited, consented. By this time, the investigators had pursued quite a few leads and examined some crucial information from the night on which Caroline was killed. These information didn't correspond.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you and back to the video.
Babis had informed the police that the attackers invaded from the basement window, but that window was very limited, and with the build of the alleged killer Babis had portrayed, it was not feasible for that to have been the access point. Babis had also stated that the house had been vandalized by the attackers. However, the adjacent residents informed the police that they didn't detect anything of the kind, and the sounds that night were of a couple's puppy weeping in distress. No house being vandalized, no pleas for assistance, no weeping baby. The house didn't have any fingerprints or DNA. To add to it all, the question of why the attackers would restrain a man and combat a woman was raised. Babis had also stated that the attackers must have removed the storage card for the living room security camera, but data from the camera disclosed that the card was removed at 1:20 in the morning, several hours before the attackers had supposedly accessed the house. Additional information were that Caroline was wearing a smartwatch that tracked her heartbeat. Her heartbeat readings from 3:58 in the morning showed she was resting, but the ones at 4:05 in the morning were elevated by 50%, showing severe physical and mental pressure, and the readings at 4:11 in the morning showed that her heart had stopped. This was before the time Babis had stated the killing occurred. Babis, on the other hand, had a fitness application on his smartphone. Information from the application disclosed that he was moving around during the time in which he was supposed to be restrained. The police had also attempted to recreate Babis contacting emergency services with his phone. However, no one was capable of accomplishing that. Police investigations disclosed that Caroline had tried to book a hotel for herself and her child on the night she was killed. A text message sent to her friend also disclosed that she was threatening to leave Babis. Back when Babis had encountered Caroline, he was on vacation in Anagnostopoulos. His mother had resided on the island and was a teacher at Caroline's school. Babis at the time was charming, intelligent, enjoyed taking photographs, and was financially comfortable. He gained Caroline's interest by piloting a helicopter above her school. This was somewhat of a fantasy that many teenage girls have, but in Caroline's situation, she was unaware that this fantasy would eventually become a horror. She thought they were the ideal combination and informed her family, expressing that she was content. Babis proposed to Caroline a year and a half into their relationship. At the time of the proposal, Caroline was underage but turned 18 3 days later. The couple exchanged promises and established themselves in Glyka Nera. In the initial years of their marriage, Caroline attended university in Athens and Babis continued working as a pilot. Both of them were active on social platforms, displaying the joyful existence they were experiencing. From their social platform accounts, the couple seemed to be in a cheerful connection filled with affection and passion. The account in Caroline's journal belonged to entirely different categories. In her journal, she often questioned her connection with Babis. In the year 2019, she wrote about fighting with Babis and how serious the disagreement was. She had mentioned that she was considering leaving and going to her sibling and that she was uncertain if she could continue with him. Throughout the duration of their marriage, Babis had become progressively manipulative and somewhat of a control freak. This conduct was rooted back in their non-traditional wedding ceremony. When Babis and Caroline took promises, they abandoned the concept of having a traditional Greek wedding ceremony that would be filled with festivities, family, and friends. Instead, they had run away. What may have seemed like a passionate gesture from the man of her fantasies was indeed an effort to isolate her. The isolation efforts persisted when the couple returned home. Babis was the only one who provided financially, and Caroline was just a university student without much money. Susan, Caroline's mother, would send some, but that too would be claimed by Babis. In her journal, she had written that she adored Babis so much that she couldn't leave him, even though this relationship hurt her. Information of a tearful confrontation with her spouse were also found in her journal. She had mentioned that she wanted to leave Babis, but given that she was expecting, she couldn't. Caroline wrote that she remained with him so their child would not grow up without both parents. Another entry dated July 2020 from her journal read that today her little one is a month old. It's also the day she informed Babis she wants to leave. She feels awful. The journal also had mentions of a residence in Athens located in Kalandri. What started out as a storybook romance for Caroline had now transformed into a horror. A horror filled with pain, terror, hopelessness, and a sense of being alienated. A horror that she couldn't flee, one that would eventually destroy her. Phone records hours before her killing also disclosed argumentative and hostile texts with Babis while the two were at home together, serving as proof of how distant and dysfunctional the connection had become. The investigators informed Babis that he was the new suspect in the killing case. He was displayed overwhelming and undeniable proof that disclosed the contradictions with the information he had initially provided. He was questioned for 8 hours before he collapsed. Eventually, he started to admit, but the admission was one filled with lies. He informed the police that he and Caroline started arguing on May 10, the night before she was killed. Babis went on to say that the couple only fought over their child and that Caroline was determined to take her and leave. This had made Babis lose control given that he stated that the child was his entire existence. Additional information of the night from Babis were that Caroline had thrown the baby child in the crib and instructed him to leave the residence. He mentioned that Caroline was the one who resorted to physical violence and had pushed him and struck him. Babis added that because of this, his reasoning became unclear. From this point forward, Babis attacked, choked her, pressed a pillow on her face using his complete body mass, and killed her, a cold-blooded killing in front of an 11-month-old child. He mentioned thinking about disposing of the body, but knew that would not be feasible. Soon after, the thought of blaming someone else came to consciousness. He staged a home invasion, and to make it look genuine, he even killed Roxy, positioned his own child next to his wife's body, and proceeded by restraining himself with some cord and tape. He mentioned that he deserved to be punished and that he owed a significant apology to everyone he'd harmed. While he believed that his actions were not justified, he attempted to transfer blame on Caroline, saying that he had become unstable and hostile after the couple's one and only child. A child that would now have to grow up without her mother, a child who will never know who her mother was because she was savagely killed by the very man she once adored. The case was later dubbed the killing that deceived the world. Babis had become so assured about escaping with the killing that he didn't bother to eliminate crucial proof. In May 2022, he was charged and found guilty of planned killing, obstructing the course of justice, deceiving authorities, and animal cruelty.